On January 24, 1536, the King of England fell silent. 2 hours passed. No breath, no movement, no sound. When his eyes finally opened, something was wrong. The man staring back at his terrified servants was no longer Henry VIII. Over the next 11 years, his brain would decay from the inside. His body would rot while he still breathed. And the Golden King would transform into a monster history would never forget. But here's what they don't tell you in the history books. Hit subscribe before we descend into the nightmare. You'll need someone to remind you this was real. London, 1509. A new king ascends the throne of England, and the entire kingdom holds its breath in wonder. Henry VIII is only 17 years old. But this is no trembling boy wearing a crown too heavy for his head. This is something England has never seen before. 6 feet 2 inches of pure royal power. Golden-haired, blue-eyed, a jawline carved from marble. The Venetian ambassador writes home in disbelief, describing a young man whose physical presence alone commands a room. But Henry is not merely beautiful. He can wrestle the strongest men at court and leave them gasping in the dirt. He can hunt from dawn until dusk without showing fatigue. He speaks fluent Latin, French, and Spanish. He composes music that makes hardened soldiers weep. Scholars across Europe praise his brilliant mind. Women throughout the kingdom whisper his name like a prayer. The people adore him. After the cold, suspicious reign of his father, Henry VII, this young king feels like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He throws festivals that last for days. He dances until midnight. He rides through London's streets, waving to crowds who scream his name with genuine love. This is their golden prince, their protector, their hope. But Henry has one obsession that burns hotter than all the rest: jousting. Not the ceremonial pageantry that other nobles perform for applause. Real jousting, the kind where bones shatter and men die. The kind where a knight in full armor charges at another knight in full armor, both thundering toward each other on war horses bred for violence. The kind where one split-second mistake means your widow wears black for the rest of her life. Henry doesn't just watch from the royal box. He demands to be in the arena. Demands to feel the weight of the lance in his hand. Demands to hear the roar of impact when wood explodes against steel. His advisors beg him to stop. His mother pleads with tears in her eyes. The entire Privy Council warns him that England cannot afford to lose another king. Henry ignores them all, because in those moments, thundering across the tiltyard with death rushing toward him, Henry feels truly alive. He feels invincible. He feels like the warrior kings in the ancient tales he devoured as a child. Arthur, Lancelot, Alexander the Great, men who proved their worth, not with words, but with steel and courage and blood. And Henry is good, dangerously good. His athletic body, his lightning reflexes, his fearless aggression make him one of the finest jousters in England. Tournament after tournament, he emerges victorious. The crowd chants his name. Musicians compose ballads about his glory. The Golden King seems blessed by God himself. But every blessing has a price, and the price for immortality is always paid in flesh. Imagine 2 locomotives racing toward each other at full speed. Now imagine you're sitting on one of them, wearing 70 pounds of steel plates, holding a 12-foot wooden spear aimed at the other driver's chest. That's jousting. The horses weigh over 1,000 pounds each. They're bred for one purpose: controlled aggression, trained to charge without hesitation, without fear, straight into collision. When they reach full gallop, they're moving at nearly 30 miles per hour. The combined force of impact can exceed 2 tons. The lance itself is designed to concentrate all that momentum into a single point. When it connects with armor, the shock travels through metal, through padding, straight into bone. Ribs crack. Collarbones snap like dry branches. Necks twist at angles that should be impossible. And the armor? The very thing meant to protect you becomes a cage. If you fall, you're carrying an extra person's weight in steel. You can't get up quickly. You can't roll away. And if your horse goes down on top of you, you're pinned beneath a thrashing animal that's just as terrified and disoriented as you are. The tilt-yard records tell the story in blood. Broken arms, shattered jaws, pierced lungs. Men who walked into the arena and were carried out in pieces. Some died instantly. Others lingered for days, drowning in their own fluids as internal injuries slowly killed them. A few survived but never spoke again, never walked again, their minds trapped in bodies that no longer obeyed. This is the game Henry refuses to abandon. 1524. A lance splinters against Henry's helmet during a tournament. For a moment, he can't see, can't breathe. His vision fills with white light and then darkness, but he shakes it off. Rides again the next day. 1525. Another tournament, another impact. This time his hand goes numb for weeks. The royal physicians whisper nervously about nerve damage. Henry ignores them, but 1527 changes everything. During a demonstration joust, Henry's leg is injured when he's thrown from his horse. Not a clean break. Something worse. A deep wound that refuses to heal properly. The physicians try everything. Poultices made from herbs. Hot compresses. Prayers. Nothing works. The wound closes, but beneath the skin, something festers. The leg begins to cause him pain. Not constant. Not unbearable. Just enough to remind him that his body, for the first time in his life, is failing him. His advisors see their chance. They beg him to retire from the tilt-yard, to watch from safety like other kings, to preserve himself for England. Henry's response is to schedule another tournament. Because here's what no one understands. Henry doesn't joust despite the danger. He jousts because of it. Every time he survives, it proves he's chosen by God, protected, special, immortal, until January 24th, 1536, the day God stopped protecting him. Greenwich Palace. Winter air sharp enough to sting your lungs. The tilt-yard is packed with courtiers wrapped in velvet and fur, their breath forming clouds in the freezing January cold. Henry is 44 years old now. Not the lean 17-year-old who first took the throne. His face is broader, his body thicker, but in his mind, he's still that golden prince. Still invincible. Still blessed. He's already jousted several rounds that morning. Won them all. The crowd roars with every victory. Anne Boleyn watches from the stands, heavily pregnant with the child Henry prays will be his son. His advisors relax slightly. Perhaps the king will finish the day unharmed. Perhaps just this once, fortune will smile. The final joust is announced. Henry mounts his warhorse. The animal shifts beneath him, massive and powerful. 70 pounds of steel plate covers every inch of the king's body. His helmet alone weighs nearly 15 pounds. Through the narrow slit in his visor, the world becomes a dark tunnel with one bright point of focus. His opponent at the far end of the tilt-yard. The flag drops. Both horses explode forward. Hooves thunder against frozen ground. The distance between them collapses in seconds. Henry lowers his lance, aims, the same motion he's perfected 1,000 times. But something goes wrong. Maybe the horse stumbles. Maybe Henry's timing is off by a fraction of a second. Maybe the opponent's lance hits at exactly the wrong angle. Later, witnesses will argue about what they saw. But in that instant, none of the details matter. Henry's horse goes down. Not a graceful fall, not a controlled dismount. The animal crashes to the earth like a felled tree, and Henry goes with it. 1,000 pounds of muscle and bone, moving at full speed, hits the frozen ground, and then it lands on top of the king. The crowd's roar dies in their throats. For a moment, The entire tiltyard is silent except for the horse's panicked breathing and the scrape of metal against dirt as the animal struggles to rise. Henry doesn't move. The horse finally staggers to its feet, stumbling away. Henry remains on the ground, motionless, not groaning, not calling for help, just lying there in his steel cage, a crumpled shape that looks suddenly terribly small. Attendants sprint across the tiltyard. They reach the king and freeze. Through the visor slit, they can see his face. Eyes closed, skin pale. No response when they call his name. They begin removing the armor with shaking hands. Piece by piece, the steel plates come away. Helmet, breastplate, gauntlets. Beneath the metal, Henry's body is limp. His chest rises and falls, so he's breathing. But he doesn't wake, doesn't open his eyes, doesn't respond to touch or sound or the desperate pleading of the men hovering over him. In the stands, Anne Boleyn goes white. Courtiers whisper prayers. Someone is sent running to fetch the royal physicians. But the physicians can do nothing except watch and wait. Because whatever happened inside Henry's skull when 1,000 pounds of horse slammed him into the frozen ground, it's beyond their ability to see or understand or heal. All they can do is count the minutes and pray that the king wakes up before England loses its throne. 1 hour passes. The king lies in his chambers, surrounded by physicians who can measure his pulse but cannot see inside his skull. They apply cool cloths to his forehead. They burn herbs and mutter Latin prayers. They check his breathing again and again, as if repetition will somehow wake him. Outside the chamber, the palace descends into controlled chaos. Messengers are dispatched to notify the Privy Council. Servants whisper in corners. Everyone asks the same question nobody can answer. What happens if the king doesn't wake up? England has no clear heir. Anne Boleyn is pregnant, but the child isn't born yet. And even if it survives, there's no guarantee it will be male. Henry's daughter Mary has been declared illegitimate. The succession is a nightmare waiting to unfold. 2 hours pass. In modern medicine, 5 minutes of unconsciousness after head trauma is considered severe. 10 minutes suggests life-threatening brain injury. Anything beyond that enters territory where permanent damage becomes almost certain. Henry has been unconscious for 120 minutes. Here's what's happening inside his skull that the Tudor physicians cannot see. When the horse crushed him into the frozen ground, Henry's brain slammed against the inside of his skull. Not once, multiple times, forward on impact, backward on rebound, the soft tissue tearing against sharp bone. The brain doesn't have pain receptors, so there's no immediate agony to wake him. But at the microscopic level, neural pathways are shredding. Axons, the delicate fibers that carry electrical signals between brain cells, are stretching and snapping like overstressed cables. Blood vessels are rupturing, flooding tissue with fluid that has nowhere to drain. The frontal lobe, the part of the brain that controls personality, impulse regulation, emotional stability, is taking the worst of the damage. Because of how skulls are shaped, this area always bears the brunt of impact injuries. The ridge of bone just behind the forehead acts like a blade, cutting into the soft matter with every collision. And Henry's brain has been colliding for 2 solid hours of inflammatory response, swelling, pressure building with no release valve, cells dying in cascades as oxygen supply is cut off. Then, finally, his eyes open. The physicians nearly weep with relief. They crowd closer, asking him questions. Can he hear them? Does he know where he is? Does he remember what happened? Henry blinks slowly. His gaze drifts across their faces as if he's seeing them through fog. After a long pause, he speaks. His words are slurred but recognizable. He knows his name, knows he's king, knows he fell. The physicians declare it a miracle. God has spared England's monarch. Within hours, the news spreads throughout London. The king lives. The crisis is averted. Everything will return to normal. But something has changed. In the weeks that follow, people close to Henry begin noticing small things. His temper, always fiery, now ignites over trivial matters. He forgets conversations he had mere hours ago. His headaches become frequent and severe, forcing him to retreat to darkened rooms. And that leg wound from 1527, the one that had mostly healed, it reopens. This time, it will never close again. At first, it's just a small opening on his left thigh, a patch of skin that won't quite close. The physicians assure Henry this is normal after such trauma. The body needs time to repair itself. They apply fresh bandages daily, mix poultices from expensive imported herbs, give him wine mixed with ground pearls, because surely something so valuable must have healing properties. Weeks pass. The wound doesn't shrink. It expands. The edges become inflamed, angry red bleeding into purple. When the physicians change the dressings, they find not healthy pink tissue forming beneath, but something wet and raw that weeps constantly. The king's leg is crying, and it won't stop. Then the right leg begins to mirror the left. 2 ulcers now, both growing, both refusing every treatment the royal physicians can devise. They try everything documented in their medical texts. Poultices made from honey and wine, compresses soaked in rose water, prayers to Saint Roch, patron saint of plague victims and the diseased. Nothing works. Because here's what they don't understand. That 1527 injury damaged more than just skin and muscle. It compromised the veins beneath. Blood flow to the tissue is strangled. And when Henry crashed to the ground in 1536, the trauma tore everything open again, but worse this time. Deeper, more extensive. Without proper circulation, wounds cannot heal. The body tries to rebuild, but it's constructing on a foundation that's already crumbling. Every new layer of tissue dies almost as quickly as it forms. The physicians turn to more aggressive methods. Cauterization. They heat iron rods in braziers until the metal glows red, sometimes white. Then they press the burning iron directly against the ulcerated flesh, trying to seal the wound through sheer heat. The theory is that by destroying the infected tissue, they'll allow healthy tissue to grow. The reality is agony beyond description. Henry endures this procedure again and again, gripping the arms of his chair hard enough to leave finger impressions in the wood, sweat pouring down his face, teeth clenched so hard his jaw aches for days afterward. The smell of his own flesh burning fills the chamber. And after all that suffering, the wounds still don't close. By 1538, both legs are covered in ulcers, some the size of thumbnails, others spreading across entire sections of his thighs and calves. The openings tunnel deep into muscle tissue, creating pockets where fluid accumulates, where infection breeds. Henry can no longer joust, can barely walk some days. The athletic king who once danced until midnight now limps through his own palace, leaning heavily on a walking stick. His gait becomes recognizable throughout the court. That slow, painful shuffle, the slight drag of his right foot, the wince he tries to hide when weight shifts to his left leg. But the physical limitation is only part of the horror. Because those open wounds, constantly weeping, never healing, are about to become something far worse than painful. They're about to become infectious. And once infection takes hold in tissue that cannot repair itself, it never truly leaves. It simply waits, builds, spreads, until eventually the entire palace will smell it coming. The courtiers notice it first. A smell that creeps through the corridors of Whitehall Palace like something living, sweet and rotten at the same time. The kind of odor that coats the back of your throat and stays there long after you've left the room. Some compare it to meat left in summer heat, others to the battlefield, where bodies lie unburied for days. They're smelling the king. The ulcers have progressed beyond simple wounds. Medical texts from the era, described the condition as fistulating cellulitis. In plain terms, the infection has burrowed deep beneath the skin, creating tunnels through the tissue. These pockets fill with pus, with dead cells, with bacteria that thrive in the warm, oxygen-starved environment. And because the wounds never close, there's nowhere for the infection to be contained. It simply lives there, permanently, growing stronger during flare-ups, temporarily subdued during brief periods of improvement, but never fully eliminated. Witnesses later record that the smell could be detected 3 rooms away. Think about that. 3 rooms. Through heavy wooden doors and thick tapestries meant to insulate chambers from cold and noise. Through air already thick with incense that servants burn constantly, trying to mask the odor. The infection is so aggressive, so pervasive, that it announces the king's presence before he even enters a space. Henry's servants face an impossible task. They change his bandages multiple times per day, layer after layer of linen cloth, soaked through within hours. The fabric comes away stained yellow and green, and sometimes streaked with red when fresh bleeding begins. They wash the ulcers with wine, apply fresh poultices, wrap everything tightly, and hope it holds until the next changing. It never does. The infection also brings fever, not constantly, but in waves. Henry will be functional one day, conducting business, meeting with ambassadors. The next day he's bedridden, shaking with chills despite being buried under blankets, his skin burning to the touch. These episodes of sepsis, where bacteria flood into his bloodstream, should kill him. Somehow they don't. His body fights back just enough to survive. But each time, it takes longer to recover. Each time, he emerges a little weaker than before. The psychological toll is devastating. Imagine being trapped in a body that betrays you constantly. You can't escape the smell because it's coming from you. You can't hide the pain because it's written across your face with every step. You can't maintain dignity when servants must help you with the most basic tasks because your legs won't support your weight without agony. Henry, who once defined himself through physical prowess, is being dismantled piece by piece. And the courtiers must pretend not to notice, must bow and smile and speak to him as if everything is normal, as if they can't smell the rot, as if they don't see him aging a decade with every year that passes. Because acknowledging the king's deterioration is dangerous. It suggests weakness, mortality, and mortal kings can be replaced, so they breathe through their mouths. They burn more incense. They avert their eyes when he winces. And Henry, trapped in his rotting flesh, begins to understand that the body he trusted has become his prison, a prison that's slowly killing him from the inside out. 15-0-9. Henry's armor is crafted for a man with a 32-inch waist, sleek, form-fitting, designed to showcase the athletic physique beneath the steel. 1545. His armor makers receive new measurements. 54-inch waist, 52-inch chest. The numbers tell a story of transformation, so complete it seems impossible they re-describing the same human being. The weight gain doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual surrender that takes years. First, Henry stops jousting because his legs can't handle the impact. Then he stops hunting because he can't stay in the saddle for hours. Then he stops dancing because even standing for extended periods becomes torture. But his appetite doesn't stop. If anything, it increases. Medieval royal feasts are legendary for their excess. Whole roasted boars, swans dressed in their own feathers, pies containing entire flocks of birds, subtleties, elaborate sugar sculptures shaped like castles and dragons, wine flowing like rivers, course after course after course, sometimes lasting 6 hours. Henry has always eaten well. But now, food becomes one of the few pleasures left in a body defined by pain. He can't move without agony, can't sleep through the night without the ulcers waking him. can't make love to his wives without humiliation, but he can eat, he can drink, he can temporarily drown the suffering in sensation. The weight accumulates. 50 pounds. 100. More. By the early 1540s, estimates place him near 400 pounds. His body mass index approaches 50, a number that suggests severe obesity even by modern standards. His face, once angular and handsome, becomes round and jowled. His neck thickens until it seems to merge directly with his shoulders. His legs, already weakened by ulcers, now must support a weight they were never designed to carry. Walking becomes an ordeal, not just because of the infected wounds, but because the sheer mass of his body makes every movement exhausting. A journey that once took him 5 minutes now requires 20. Stairs become impossible without assistance. He begins avoiding them entirely, having chambers rearranged so everything he needs is on a single floor. Then even walking short distances becomes too difficult. The royal engineers designed special devices. Chairs with poles attached so servants can carry the king like cargo. Ramps installed throughout the palaces so he doesn't have to navigate steps. Eventually, mechanical hoisting systems, primitive elevators that use pulleys and counterweights to move him between floors when absolutely necessary. Think about the indignity. The king who once vaulted onto his horse in full armor now has to be lifted by machinery. The man who wrestled for sport now requires 4 servants just to help him stand. His subjects catch glimpses of this transformation. The few who see him in his final years are shocked. This bloated, limping figure bears no resemblance to the golden prince they remember. Some wonder if it's even the same person. Rumors spread that the real Henry died years ago, and this is an impostor. If only they knew the truth was somehow worse. That the man inside that failing body is still Henry, still remembers what he was, still dreams sometimes that he's young and whole and powerful, and then wakes to reality, to pain, to immobility, to a body that has become a monument to decay. The royal physicians are desperate. They've tried everything in their considerable arsenal, and the king's ulcers refuse to heal. So they turn to their most trusted medical texts, ancient manuscripts copied and recopied through generations, recipes passed down from Greek and Roman doctors who treated emperors and generals. One particular document, catalogued as Sloane Manuscript 1047, contains detailed formulas for treating chronic wounds. The physicians study it carefully, mix the ingredients precisely, apply the resulting ointments and salves to Henry's legs with confidence. They have no idea they're slowly poisoning him. The recipes call for multiple forms of lead oxide, lead acetate, lead sulfide, sometimes mixed with mercury, another heavy metal prized for its supposed healing properties. The physicians believe these substances draw out infection, promote tissue growth, encourage the body's natural healing processes. They're partially right. Lead does have antibacterial properties. It can kill some of the organisms infecting Henry's wounds. But it comes with a price no one in the 16th century understands. Here's the crucial detail. Healthy, intact skin blocks most lead absorption. The metal sits on the surface and eventually washes away. But Henry's legs aren't covered in healthy skin. They're covered in open ulcers, raw tissue, direct pathways into his bloodstream. Every time the physicians apply their lead-based treatments, the metal absorbs straight into his system, day after day, month after month, year after year. The lead accumulates in his bones, his organs, his brain tissue. It doesn't leave. It just builds. And lead poisoning has very specific symptoms. Violent mood swings, difficulty controlling anger, problems with memory and concentration, chronic headaches, insomnia, depression, paranoia. Sound familiar? The physicians notice their patient becoming increasingly erratic, but they never connect it to their treatments. Why would they? These are proven remedies, ancient wisdom. If anything, they assume Henry needs more medicine, not less. So they increase the applications, try stronger concentrations, experiment with different combinations of metals and herbs. And the lead continues seeping into the king's body. There's a cruel irony here. The same doctors trying to heal Henry's legs are inadvertently destroying his mind. Every bandage change, every fresh application of ointment, every careful treatment is adding more poison to a system already struggling under the weight of infection and brain trauma. It's impossible to know exactly how much lead Henry absorbed over those final years. But modern analysis of similar treatments suggests the levels would have been significant. Enough to cause chronic toxicity. Enough to amplify the personality changes already triggered by his head injury. Enough to turn a damaged king into something far worse. The physicians keep immaculate records of their treatments. They document every formula, every application, every apparent improvement or setback. They're so proud of their dedication, their precision, their unwavering commitment to saving their monarch. They never realize they're writing a manual for slow destruction. And Henry, trapped in his decaying body, subject to the best medical care money and power can provide, is being poisoned by the very people sworn to protect him. The wounds won't heal. The weight won't decrease. The pain won't stop. But soon, none of that will matter. Because something else is happening inside Henry's skull. Something that will make his physical suffering seem almost merciful by comparison. His mind is beginning to unravel. The frontal lobe sits just behind your forehead. It's the part of your brain that makes you human. Not in the biological sense, but in the way that matters. It's where you regulate emotions, control impulses, make plans, feel empathy, understand consequences. It's also the most vulnerable part of the brain during impact trauma. When Henry's head struck the ground in 1536, his skull stopped moving. But his brain didn't. It kept traveling forward until it slammed against the inside of the bone. Then it rebounded backward, hitting the rear of the skull. Forward, backward, forward. A violent collision happening in milliseconds. The frontal lobe, positioned right behind the forehead, takes the worst of this. The bone there has a rough, irregular surface, almost serrated. When soft brain tissue crashes against it repeatedly, the damage is catastrophic. In 2016, researchers at Yale University examined historical accounts of Henry's behavior. They compared his symptoms to modern cases of traumatic brain injury. Their conclusion was striking. Henry's pattern of personality change matches almost perfectly with a specific type of injury called diffuse axonal injury. Axons are the microscopic cables that connect brain cells. They carry electrical signals that let different parts of your brain communicate. When your head experiences sudden acceleration and deceleration, these delicate fibers stretch. If the force is severe enough, they tear, not all at once. Not in ways a 16th century physician could detect. The damage is microscopic. Individual connections severing, neural pathways fragmenting, communication between brain regions breaking down. And once axons are torn, they don't heal. The brain can sometimes reroute signals, create new pathways, but the original connections are gone forever. Here's what makes this particularly horrifying. The person doesn't know it's happening. There's no pain, no obvious moment when something breaks. They just slowly become someone different. Their decision-making deteriorates. Their emotional control weakens. Their ability to think through consequences evaporates. Modern researchers have seen this exact pattern in professional athletes. Football players who suffer repeated concussions. Boxers who take too many hits to the head. The symptoms are remarkably consistent. Explosive anger over minor provocations. Impulsive decisions that make no logical sense. Paranoia. Depression. Difficulty forming new memories. Problems articulating thoughts that once came easily. A fundamental shift in personality that leaves them unrecognizable to people who knew them before. The NFL now has protocols for this. Mandatory rest periods after concussions. Retirement guidelines. Psychological support. Because they understand that brain trauma doesn't just cause physical damage. It rewrites who you are at the most fundamental level. Henry had none of these protections. No understanding of what had happened inside his skull. No way to recognize that his changing behavior wasn't a choice, but a symptom. No treatment, because the medicine to address traumatic brain injury wouldn't exist for another 500 years. So the frontal lobe damage just progressed. Neural pathways continued degrading. Scar tissue formed where healthy connections used to exist. The brain's inflammation response, meant to heal, instead caused more harm by increasing pressure in a confined space. And the man who was Henry VIII, the brilliant strategist, the eloquent speaker, the charismatic king, began disappearing, replaced by something else, something darker, something that even Henry himself didn't fully recognize. The first sign is the rage, not the calculated anger of a king asserting authority, not the theatrical fury designed to intimidate courtiers. This is something raw and primal, an explosion of violence that appears from nowhere and vanishes just as suddenly, leaving Henry looking almost confused by his own behavior. A servant delivers wine a few minutes late. Henry screams at him for 20 minutes, face purple, veins bulging in his neck, threats of execution pouring out in a torrent. Then, an hour later, he's calm again, jovial even, as if nothing happened. A minister offers advice Henry himself requested. Mid-sentence, the king interrupts with such vicious condemnation that the man flees the chamber in tears. The next day, Henry asks why that minister hasn't been attending council meetings. This isn't strategy. It's not political maneuvering. People close to the king begin to recognize something terrifying. He can't control it. The anger seizes him like a physical force. And when it passes, he sometimes doesn't even remember what he said. The memory problems become impossible to ignore. Henry forgets conversations that happened hours earlier. Asks the same questions multiple times in a single day. Summons advisors to discuss matters already resolved, growing angry when they try to remind him. Important state documents vanish from his memory as if they never existed. This is the man who once mastered Latin, French, and Spanish, who composed complex theological arguments, who navigated the political landscape of Europe with brilliant cunning. Now he struggles to track basic information from one morning to the next afternoon. Then there are the headaches, blinding pain that strikes without warning. Henry retreats to darkened chambers, forbidding anyone from entering. Lies there for hours, sometimes days, while the agony pounds behind his eyes like something trying to split his skull from the inside. No medicine helps. No treatment provides relief. He can only endure until it passes. The insomnia compounds everything. Night after night, he lies awake despite exhaustion. His mind races with fragmented thoughts he can't quite organize. Worries that spiral into paranoia. Memories that blur together until he can't distinguish what happened yesterday from events 10 years ago. When he finally does sleep, it's fitful. Interrupted, he wakes more tired than when he went to bed. And his speech, once his greatest weapon, begins to fail him. Mid-conversation, Henry stops. Struggles to find a word he's used 1,000 times. His face tightens with frustration as the thought dissolves before he can articulate it. Sometimes he powers through, using elaborate circumlocution to work around the gap. Other times he just stops talking entirely, sitting in silence while courtiers wait nervously. The brilliant orator who once held Parliament spellbound now stumbles over simple phrases. Here's what makes it truly nightmarish. Henry knows something is wrong. In his few lucid moments, he recognizes the deterioration, feels himself slipping, watches his own mind betraying him in ways his body already has. But recognizing the problem doesn't give him power to stop it. The brain damage continues its invisible work. The lead poisoning adds its own layer of cognitive destruction. The chronic pain and sleep deprivation shred what's left of his mental resilience. And somewhere in the wreckage of Henry's mind, a question begins to form. If he's losing control of his own thoughts, his own memories, his own words, what's left? 1534, 2 years before the accident. Henry is still recognizable as the king who charmed Europe. He's gained weight, yes. His leg bothers him occasionally. But he's fundamentally the same man. Strategic, calculating, capable of cruelty, but in service of clear political goals. Then something shifts. Historians examining court records notice subtle changes in his behavior during 1535. Letters written in his hand become more erratic. Decisions that once followed logical patterns start seeming arbitrary. He's quicker to take offense, slower to forgive perceived slights. Some researchers believe the brain damage might have started earlier than the 1536 accident. Perhaps those smaller jousting incidents in the 1520s caused cumulative trauma. Micro-injuries building over time, each one adding to the damage until the foundation finally cracked. But after January 1536, the changes accelerate. Anne Boleyn bears the first full weight of the transformation. Within months of the accident, Henry's obsession with her curdles into something toxic. The woman he defied the Pope for, the woman he restructured England's entire religion to marry, suddenly becomes intolerable to him. May 1536, 4 months after the fall. Anne is arrested on charges so absurd they barely deserve mention. Adultery with 5 men, including her own brother. Treason. Witchcraft. The evidence is fabricated. The confessions extracted through torture. Everyone knows it. Henry doesn't care. He wants her gone, and he wants it now. She's beheaded on May 19th. The same day Henry becomes engaged to Jane Seymour. No mourning period, no reflection. Just immediate replacement, as if Anne never existed. This is new. The old Henry was ruthless when necessary, but methodical. This feels different, impulsive, almost frantic. 1538. Henry's chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, the man who engineered Henry's entire break from Rome, makes a political miscalculation. He arranges Henry's marriage to Anne of Cleves without ensuring the king finds her attractive. The old Henry would have been angry, would have made Cromwell suffer politically, would have extracted concessions and favors as punishment. The new Henry has him executed, beheaded on July 28, 1540. No trial, no real evidence of treason, just the king's sudden, violent displeasure. By the 1540s, the transformation is complete. Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, writes letters describing Henry's mood swings with barely concealed terror. One day the king is affectionate, calling him friend. The next day he's screaming accusations, threatening imprisonment. Cranmer never knows which version will greet him. Courtiers develop strategies for survival. They learn to read Henry's face, his posture, his tone. Learn when to speak and when silence is safer. Learn to agree with whatever he said 10 minutes ago, even if it contradicts what he's saying now. Because disagreement, however polite, however well-reasoned, can be fatal. The span from 1536 to 1547 is just 11 years. But the distance between who Henry was and what he becomes is immeasurable. The golden prince is gone. The strategic king is gone. Even the calculated tyrant who broke from Rome had logic behind his actions. What remains is something unstable, unpredictable, dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with political power and everything to do with a mind that is breaking apart. And the question everyone whispers in private, never daring to speak aloud: how much worse can it get? Modern researchers examining Henry's medical records face a puzzle with too many pieces. The brain injury explains some symptoms. The lead poisoning explains others. But there are aspects of his deterioration that suggests something else might be happening simultaneously. His pituitary gland, a pea-sized structure at the base of the brain, becomes a focus of investigation. When the brain slams against the skull during trauma, this tiny gland is particularly vulnerable. It sits in a small bony cavity, essentially trapped. Any swelling or direct impact can crush it, and the pituitary controls everything: growth, metabolism, sexual function, stress response. Damage here creates cascading failures throughout the entire endocrine system. Medical historians point to Henry's fertility problems as evidence. After 1536, he fathers only one child who survives infancy. His marriages to Anne of Cleves and Catherine Howard produced no pregnancies at all. Catherine Parr, his final wife, has no children with him either, though she later remarries and conceives quickly. The pattern suggests hypogonadism, a condition where the body stops producing adequate testosterone. The symptoms match: weight gain, muscle loss, decreased fertility, mood instability, depression. All things Henry exhibits in his final decade. Then there's the Cushing's syndrome hypothesis. This occurs when the body produces too much cortisol, the stress hormone. Chronic pain and repeated infections, both of which Henry endures constantly, can trigger this. The telltale signs are distinctive: moon-shaped face, buffalo hump of fat between the shoulders, purple stretch marks on the skin, thin limbs despite obesity in the torso. Contemporary portraits of Henry from the 1540s show exactly these features. His face becomes round and swollen. His body develops that characteristic central obesity. The proportions look wrong, distorted, as if different parts of him are aging at different rates. But perhaps the most intriguing theory involves something called McLeod syndrome. This is an extremely rare genetic disorder that affects the nervous system and blood. It typically appears in middle age. The symptoms include progressive muscle weakness, heart problems, psychiatric changes, and distinctive personality alterations, neurological movement disorders, increased aggression, paranoia, difficulty with impulse control. Sound familiar? Some researchers have proposed that Henry might have carried the genetic mutation for McLeod syndrome, and the physical trauma simply accelerated its expression. This would explain why his brothers also had health problems, why the deterioration seemed to affect multiple body systems simultaneously. The truth is probably worse than any single explanation. Henry didn't have just one thing destroying him. He had all of them. Brain trauma from the jousting accident, lead poisoning from years of contaminated medical treatments, pituitary damage causing hormonal chaos, chronic infections creating systemic inflammation, possibly genetic factors making everything worse, each condition feeding into the others, each one amplifying the damage, creating a perfect storm of physical and mental deterioration that no medical knowledge of the era could possibly address. And Henry, trapped at the center of this biological catastrophe, had no idea what was happening to him. He just knew he was disappearing, piece by piece, day by day, until finally there was almost nothing left. 1539 marks the beginning of the end. Not physically, Henry will survive another 8 years, but something fundamental shifts in how he wields power. Before, there was always calculation behind the cruelty. Marriages ended for political reasons. Executions served strategic purposes. Even at his most ruthless, there was logic you could follow, patterns you could predict. Now the logic fractures. The dissolution of the monasteries, beginning in 1536, becomes total by 1540. Over 800 religious houses destroyed. Communities that stood for centuries erased in less than 4 years. The official reason is reform, corruption, allegiance to the Pope. The real reason is simpler. Henry needs their wealth, and nothing will stop him from taking it. Monks and abbots who resist disappear. Some are arrested on fabricated charges. Others simply vanish from historical records, their fates unrecorded. The king who once debated theology with scholars now treats religious institutions like obstacles to be demolished. His household becomes a place of whispered terror. Servants learn to move silently, to keep their eyes downcast, to never, ever contradict him, even when he's clearly wrong. One wrong word, one perceived slight, and you might find yourself in the Tower by sunset. The Duke of Norfolk, one of England's most powerful nobles, survives only through constant vigilance. He watches Henry's moods like a sailor watches storm clouds, knows when to advance and when to retreat. Even then, he comes within days of execution before Henry's death saves him. Catherine Howard becomes queen in 1540. She's barely 20 years old. Henry is 49, morbidly obese, covered in festering wounds, prone to explosive rages. The marriage is doomed before it begins. When evidence emerges of her romantic entanglements, Henry's response is devastating, not just to Catherine, but to everyone even tangentially connected to her. The executions spread like ripples from a stone thrown in water. Ladies-in-waiting, family members, anyone who knew and didn't tell. Catherine herself meets the same fate as Anne Boleyn. February 1542, the pattern repeating. Another wife, another scaffold. But this time, the execution breaks something in Henry. Witnesses report that he weeps afterward, not from grief, but from rage at being betrayed. As if the world itself conspired to humiliate him, his paranoia deepens. Everyone becomes suspect. Trust becomes impossible. The Privy Council meetings turn into endurance tests. Henry's attention drifts mid-discussion. He interrupts his own ministers with tangential rants that sometimes last an hour. Then he demands to know why nothing is getting accomplished. Important decisions are delayed for weeks because no one dares make a move without his explicit approval, and his approval changes from day to day. What he endorses on Monday, he denounces on Wednesday. By Friday, he's forgotten the conversation ever happened. Foreign ambassadors write home describing a king who seems to inhabit multiple realities simultaneously. Charming and generous one moment, cold and threatening the next, lucid and sharp for a few minutes, then confused and rambling. England doesn't have a monarch anymore. It has a force of nature, unpredictable, destructive, impossible to control or contain. And the question that haunts the kingdom isn't whether Henry will survive. It's what he'll destroy before he finally falls. By 1545, Henry can no longer hide what's happening to his body. The infections in his legs have spread beyond the ulcers themselves. His entire circulatory system is compromised. Blood flow sluggish and irregular. Toxins that should be filtered out instead circulate endlessly, poisoning him slowly from within. His breathing becomes labored. Not from exertion, he barely moves anymore, but because his heart is struggling. 400 pounds of flesh demand oxygen, and his cardiovascular system simply cannot keep pace. He wheezes, gasps, spends nights propped up on pillows, because lying flat makes him feel like he's drowning. The fevers return with increasing frequency, sometimes lasting days. His body temperature spikes, then crashes, then spikes again. Servants pile blankets on him while he shivers violently. Hours later, they're stripping the blankets away as sweat pours off him in sheets. During these episodes, Henry drifts in and out of lucidity. He mutters to people who aren't there, has conversations with his dead wives, argues with ministers who've been executed years ago. Then suddenly he's back, eyes clearing, demanding to know why everyone is staring at him. The physicians can do nothing but watch. Their treatments have failed. Their remedies are useless. They're reduced to managing symptoms they don't understand, fighting battles they cannot win. His appetite finally abandons him. The man who once consumed entire feasts now picks at his food like a sick child. Nothing tastes right. Nothing sits well in his stomach. He forces down a few bites, then pushes the plate away in disgust. The weight loss that follows is somehow more disturbing than the gain. Because it's not healthy reduction, it's wasting. His muscle tissue is being consumed. His body is cannibalizing itself for energy. The flesh hangs loose on his frame, making him look deflated, but the fat around his middle remains. That grotesque central obesity, the sign of his hormonal imbalance. So he looks simultaneously emaciated and obese, a body at war with itself. His skin takes on an unhealthy pallor, gray, almost translucent in places. Bruises appear without cause and refuse to fade. The slightest pressure leaves marks that linger for weeks. He stops receiving most visitors. The effort of maintaining the royal facade becomes too exhausting. Better to remain in his chambers, attended only by those who have no choice but to stay. Catherine Parr, his sixth and final wife, shows remarkable courage during these months. She tends to him when others make excuses to be elsewhere, reads to him when he cannot sleep, manages the physicians and the household staff, essentially becomes his caretaker, though she's careful never to frame it that way, because Henry still has his pride, still insists he's fine, still believes he'll recover, that this is temporary, that next week, next month, he'll be back on his feet, back to normal. Everyone around him knows better. They watch the king deteriorate day by day. Watch him shrink into his bed. Watch the brief moments of clarity become rarer and rarer. And they wait, because there's nothing else to do. Wait for the body to finally surrender. Wait for the mind to finally go dark. Wait for the end that has been coming since that January day 11 years ago, when Henry fell from his horse, and something inside him broke beyond repair. The final days blur together. Henry drifts between waking and something that isn't quite sleep. His eyes open, but he doesn't seem to see the room around him. Doesn't recognize faces he's known for decades. January 27th. The fever spikes again, higher than before. The physicians exchange glances. They've seen this pattern in dying men. The body's last desperate attempt to fight before it surrenders completely. Henry speaks, but the words don't form coherent sentences. Fragments of thoughts, names from his past. His brother Arthur, dead since 1502. His father, stern and cold, gone 40 years. His mother, who he barely remembers. Catherine Parr sits beside him, holding his hand. It's cold despite the fever. His fingers don't grip back. Someone suggests sending for Archbishop Cranmer. Henry needs to make his confession, receive last rites, prepare his soul for what's coming. But Cranmer is at his estate, hours away. And there's a problem. If they tell Henry he's dying, that might be seen as treason, predicting the king's death, suggesting weakness. Even now, with Henry barely conscious, the courtiers are terrified of his wrath. So they wait, hoping he'll slip away peacefully before the decision has to be made. January 28th, early morning. Still dark outside. Henry's breathing changes, becomes shallow, irregular. Long pauses between breaths where everyone in the room holds their own, waiting to see if another one comes. His eyes open one last time. He stares at the ceiling. His lips move, trying to form words, but no sound emerges. Whatever final thought crosses his mind remains unspoken. And the breathing stops. For several seconds, no one moves. No one speaks. They wait, just to be certain. Wait for the chest to rise one more time. It doesn't. Henry VIII, King of England, defender of the faith, supreme head of the Church of England, dies at approximately 2 in the morning. He's 55 years old. He's been king for 37 years. He's survived wars, political upheaval, religious reformation, and the execution of 2 of his 6 wives. But he couldn't survive what happened inside his own body. The cause of death is officially recorded as natural causes, which is technically true if you consider septicemia natural. If you consider the accumulated damage of 11 years of festering infections, traumatic brain injury, lead poisoning, hormonal imbalance, and systemic organ failure is simply the body running its course. The room empties quickly, servants and physicians backing away from the bed as if death itself might be contagious. Within minutes, messengers are dispatched. The news must reach the Privy Council before rumors spread. Edward, Henry's 9-year-old son, must be informed he's now king. But for a brief moment, the chamber is silent, empty except for the body on the bed. The golden prince who became a monster, the brilliant strategist who lost his mind, the invincible athlete who rotted from the inside out. Finally still, finally quiet, finally, mercifully, gone. 500 years later, medical researchers open the case files. They examine court records, physician notes, eyewitness accounts, portraits painted from life. They input the symptoms into modern diagnostic frameworks. And slowly, the pieces assemble into a picture more disturbing than any single explanation could provide. The brain didn't just rot metaphorically. It rotted literally. The jousting accident caused diffuse axonal injury, microscopic tears throughout the frontal lobe, neural pathways severing, brain tissue swelling against an unyielding skull. This alone would have changed his personality, destroyed his impulse control, shattered his emotional regulation. But the damage didn't stop there. The lead-based treatments, applied daily to open wounds for over a decade, poisoned him systematically. Lead accumulating in his brain tissue, disrupting neurotransmitter function, adding chemical deterioration to the physical trauma, amplifying the paranoia, the rage, the cognitive decline. The chronic infections created constant inflammation. His immune system in perpetual overdrive, flooding his body with chemicals meant for short-term emergencies. Except the emergency never ended. The inflammation attacked healthy tissue, accelerated aging, contributed to the hormonal collapse. The pituitary damage from the head trauma disrupted his entire endocrine system. Testosterone production plummeted. Cortisol levels spiked. His body chemistry became chaos. Weight gain, muscle loss, depression, fertility problems. Each hormonal imbalance feeding into the others. And possibly, beneath all of this, a genetic time bomb. McLeod syndrome or something similar, waiting for the right trigger. The trauma simply accelerated what might have happened anyway. No single cause, all causes. Working together, compounding, creating destruction no one factor could achieve alone. Here's the historical tragedy. If Henry hadn't fallen that day in January 1536, England's story changes completely. Anne Boleyn might have lived. The religious reforms might have proceeded differently. The executions, the paranoia, the reign of terror, all of it hinges on 2 hours of unconsciousness and the invisible damage that followed. One jousting accident, one moment of bad luck, and European history pivots. Researchers publishing in the Journal of Clinical Neuroscience conclude that Henry's transformation wasn't moral weakness or political calculation. It was neurological catastrophe. The man who became a monster did so because his brain was literally dying inside his skull. Physical rot from the axonal shearing, chemical rot from the lead poisoning, biological rot from the infections, hormonal rot from the endocrine collapse, layer upon layer of decay, hidden beneath the crown, invisible to everyone, including Henry himself, the golden prince who had everything lost it all to injuries he couldn't see, damage he couldn't understand, and treatments that poisoned him while trying to heal him. His body became a prison. His mind became a stranger. And the brain that once composed music and debated theology slowly dissolved into fragments of rage and paranoia and pain. That's the horrifying truth they don't teach in history books. Henry VIII didn't choose to become a tyrant. His brain rotted from the inside out, and he took England's future down with him.